Hello and welcome to a City Voices interview with Nick Loffree, who is a is it Qigong or Qigong?
It's Qigong.
He's a Qigong practitioner and teacher and instructor. He's been doing it for many years. And part of his story is that he experienced an altered state, an extreme state after some drug use, but he can get into all of that. Why don't you start over there, my friend?
Yeah, so in high school, I got really into experimenting with psychedelic drugs and as well as other drugs, but primarily psychedelics, I suppose. And sort of just went down a path where I started to have some psychotic delusions. I was very stressed about the state of the world. I thought I was going to grow up into a world that didn't exist anymore, from climate change or war or something like that. I was reading a lot of conspiracy theories and just mainstream news, and kind of thought by the year 2020 the world wouldn't exist. So I thought, what's the point of me studying and going to school when the only thing I can do is maybe start a revolution, change the whole world, or maybe just learn to live in the woods and hunt deer with a bow and arrow, and that's the only way I'm going to survive this apocalypse. So I was very stressed about it, and the way I found to deal with my stress was to do enough drugs that I could convince myself that I was the chosen one sent by the gods or aliens or some higher beings to save the world, right? And implement eco-communist utopia or something like that. And that was the only way that I was going to have a world that I could actually grow up into. And but the only way I could convince myself of this was to do enough drugs. So I did enough ketamine at one point to convince myself that I was the reincarnation of some famous guy that I was obsessed with, and that gods were like watching over me, and angels and aliens were all telling me what to do by showing me different numbers on the clock, and that would tell my brain what decisions were the right ones to make to achieve this goal. And so I was kind of going a little crazy, but then it really got bad when I did some LSD, and I had some kind of like supernatural experiences, and that really opened my mind to what was possible in terms of like reality at all.
Can you tell us about the supernatural experiences? That sounds really cool.
Yeah, so basically me and a couple friends learned to use like telepathy and send each other our thoughts and images and sounds and emotions and stuff like that while on LSD. And that was very interesting. But later it turned into just another thing to like feed this sort of grandeur delusion. So I convinced myself like, oh, like I am a psychic now. So that's even more like evidence that I'm the chosen one. Although when I wasn't on LSD, it didn't seem I was able to access those same abilities, but I started to kind of convince myself I could in order to continue to feed this sort of elevated confidence to convince myself that I was like the chosen one or whatever. And eventually I convinced myself so much that I was psychic that I started to get really paranoid and started thinking everybody was hearing my thoughts all the time, that I'd broken something in my brain where just everywhere I went, my thoughts were just leaking out of my head and people were hearing my thoughts, and became extremely paranoid and extremely embarrassed and insecure. Everywhere I'm walking, thinking everybody's hearing everything I'm thinking all the time. And it started turning into, then I started thinking I was hearing other people's thoughts. I'd hear voices in my head that basically were like my neighbors or my friends or the girl I liked at school or my parents. And they'd all be telling me to kill myself and things like that because they were all so sick of hearing my thoughts. And so that's around that time I kind of figured out like, okay, I'm either extremely paranoid or I'm some kind of schizophrenic or something, but I didn't know which one it was. And my mom figured out I'd stopped going to school because I couldn't be around people anymore. And she was like, why aren't you going to school? And I kind of told her like, I don't know if I'm uncontrollably psychic or have gone totally batshit crazy. And she went with batshit crazy. She didn't believe the psychic part, but so she took me to a psychiatrist, and he referred me to a mental hospital, and they got me to stay there for 2 weeks by kind of having me. They kind of ask you like the suicide questions, like, have you ever thought about killing yourself? And I was like, oh, I guess I thought about it. I wasn't really suicidal, but the questions are kind of funny the way they're structured. Like,
tell us about your experience in the hospital with the patients, the staff, the doctors.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So I found it extremely weird because uh, nobody, there was no like therapy there. It was all just medicine. So you go into the hospital and the psychiatrist comes and talks to you every day, but they just talk to you for like 5 minutes just to like see whether they should give you more or less meds, basically. And so nobody's there to like understand you or understand like, oh, is there like some kind of trauma, like were you bullied and this is why you have these weird delusions and um, nobody's interested in any of that. They just want to give you medications, which the medications were like helpful, although there was a ton of side effects that took me like a decade to get rid of, even after I stopped taking them.
Tell us about
Um,
the side effects.
yeah, so the first antipsychotic I was put on had the worst side effects. I gained like 75 pounds in like 2 months or something. Uh, I got my like half my body covered in like cystic acne and boils and like skin infections. My face and head became covered in eczema. Um, I got like all these weird liver problems. Like it hurt to breathe because my lungs pressing on my liver was like painful. Uh, I like lost the ability to digest a bunch of foods. Like to this day, I can't eat dairy anymore and stuff like that.
Was it
Um,
like an allergic reaction to these drugs, or was it just the
it's
side
just the
effect?
side effects that come with it. So it made me extremely depressed, which was it's kind of like I was so anxious and paranoid all the time that like depression was like the opposite negative emotion. So like it was like depression was like making it better in a way, but it did make me very depressed. It gave me brain fog. What else? I like couldn't get boners anymore for a while. I couldn't
Yeah.
ejaculate anymore. Uh,
Was
I
it
was
just
very
like
numb.
just one drug or like a cocktail?
So this was just one drug. It was called risperidone.
Hmm.
Later, I kind of found out that that was maybe like a outdated antipsychotic that they shouldn't have prescribed me in the first place.
Hmm.
Um, about 6 months or a year into this or something, I switched to olanzapine, which seemed to have way less side effects. By then, a lot of the damage had been done. So about like most of the side effects just completely stayed even after I got off risperidone for years. Some of them got like slightly better. Some of them got like half better, but most of it just stayed. So I spent like years and years trying to figure out how to just get my physical health back. But that was a blessing in disguise because it made me really figure out like, oh, like when I do stuff that helps my physical health and helps these seemingly physical problems, my mental health gets way better. And so this is what kind of got me into like qigong, like you mentioned before, which is really like a mind body integrated healing art, which the whole philosophy is like what you do to the body affects the mind, what you do with your mind affects your body. The thing in between these in qigong we call qi, which is like energy that connects your mind and body together. You could kind of westernize it saying, our hormones, our neurotransmitters, all these things are like chemical mediators between our state of consciousness and our body. But basically, yeah, I figured out like, wow, every time I do something that makes my acne go away or helps my eczema or helps my liver feel better, like I stop being depressed or my anxiety goes way down or I have less paranoid thoughts. So it kind of it was a little bit of a blessing in disguise.
Okay, what was the diagnosis they gave you?
They called it drug-induced psychosis.
Okay, so psychosis that was drug induced, basically, not
Yeah,
something independent of the drugs, right?
yeah, supposedly.
What do you have to say about it?
Well, I think I think the drugs were kind of like the trigger, but there's a lot of underlying stuff that went into it. Like I was in my high school, everybody was doing the same drugs as me, and we were all doing lots and lots of them, and a lot of people were doing a lot more of them than me. So my question was always, how come I was the one that went psychotic? And I think mainstream medicine would say like, oh, it's genetics. You had like some genetic predisposition or something. I think it was more than that. I had like severe social anxiety. I'd been kind of picked on a lot going into high school, and so I had this like chip on my shoulder, really like desperate to prove myself and everything, and trying to fit in with groups that didn't really want to be my friend, and then going home and being depressed about it. So there's all this like mental health problems that I had, like depression and anxiety before I went psychotic. And a lot of the reason I was doing so many drugs was because I was trying to self-medicate for that depression and anxiety issues. So I think it was more like the drugs just kind of triggered an underlying issue. And that's kind of
Okay.
what I found when I got into like more self-healing. I managed to get off the antipsychotic meds after about 2 years on
before you get into that, I'm sorry.
Sure.
We'll definitely cover that because that's very important. Yeah. But can we rewind back to childhood? What was it like in your home as a child?
My childhood was pretty awesome. I think the only probably emotional issue was like I had a very distant, angry father who, you're kind of always afraid of him coming home. Not because he was going to hit you, but like he just was like a very serious guy who, like, if you were a child like playing with your toys, he was mad that you weren't doing chores or home. It just he didn't believe in childhood basically. So he believed that children should be like little adults who like work as hard as he does all the time. And so he'd always come home extremely angry. So I think that kind of like weared on me a little bit, but it wasn't like that big of a deal. He was also like extremely critical. So like if you take me to a sports game or something, like we go to hockey. I played hockey every year growing up, even though I never wanted to. It would kind of be like the car ride home is just my dad yelling at me for everything I did wrong in the game. So I kind of think I had like this inbuilt like lack of self-esteem from some of that. Like it's just like, oh, everything I do is wrong. I'm always like just very sensitive to other people's criticism kind of thing. But that wasn't like a huge deal because I had a very sweet mom. So it kind of like balanced out a little bit. So childhood, I felt like I was mostly well adjusted. But once I got kind of into middle school, everybody's hitting puberty and everything. Everybody kind of turns into an asshole. I felt like I just had kind of a sensitive personality already. And then being in that like hyper competitive, like 7th, 8th grade environment where all everybody does is just make fun of each other for everything they can think of, like really wore me down. I was a bit of a late bloomer. So I was a lot smaller than all the other guys. And so I'd get beat up a lot. All of them had like black belts in Taekwondo for some reason at like 12 years old. And so they all just kind of beat the crap out of me all the time.
Like, did they beat you bloody?
No, everybody, like, it was like a kind of honorable fighting. Like, it wasn't like I was like the one kid who had no friends getting bullied. It was more like just all the guys just fought each other all the time for fun. But I was just so small and scrawny that what they thought was a fun fight was just me getting my butt whooped all the time.
Okay.
So I kind of just learned to like shut up and it just kind of like continued to build this sense of like, nothing I do is right. The clothes I wear are never right. The things I say are never right. Like I'm just like this like loser, right? And when I go to high school, I go to a different high school, and so I leave all those assholes behind. And my high school is full of like way better people. It felt like I went from like Catholic school to public school. For some reason, all these like Polish Catholic kids were like huge assholes. When I go to public school, there's like almost no bullying or anything. I was really surprised how nice everybody was. But I still had this like huge chip on my shoulder and just this like pattern of like low self-esteem, like in my unconscious. And the way I learned to deal with it was like, oh, like when I get drunk, people think I'm funny. When I get high, people think I'm funny. So I'm going to do as many drugs as I can because that's what makes people think I'm like cool and edgy and funny, right? And so I like lean into that as hard as I can. But it's not really solving the underlying issue, which I don't know what I should have done about, maybe therapy or something. But yeah, that's kind of what led me down that path a little bit.
So fast forwarding a little bit, you came out of the hospital, the drugs had side effects, you started doing Qigong and it started helping, and you decided that maybe you can wean off the medication, right?
Yeah, so I actually didn't start with Qigong. I started with meditation, which I wouldn't recommend to most mentally ill people. I think doing more like body-based stuff is better than mind-based stuff. It's kind of it's like a trope in Chinese medicine. Like if something's wrong with the mind, start with healing the body. If something's wrong with the body, start with healing the mind or spirit, right? And just because whichever is weaker is going to have less ability to be the healer. So
when you say weaker, what do you mean by weaker?
Like if your mind is like extremely disturbed, like you're hearing voices and everything, like trying to like meditate and things is not going to be like super easy for you, right? So it's a little easier to be like, oh, I'm going to improve my diet. I'm going to get a little healthy exercise. I'm going to make sure my sleep's good. And these are going to kind of start to stabilize my mind so that maybe eventually my mind has a little more ability to do something like meditation or something like that.
Did you ever hear voices?
I did, yeah. I would kind of hear like I thought I was hearing everybody's thoughts, so they were all kind of telling me like to kill myself and stuff.
Uh, and
Yeah.
but that what about today? Any residuals from that?
A little bit sometimes, but not nothing negative.
Oh, that's good. They're positive.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear like voice. I sometimes I hear like a voice when I pray or something. So, but it's like kind of helpful stuff usually.
Oh, that's nice. That's nice.
Yeah,
Okay, so weaning off and getting
yeah,
more into holistic body and mind. Well, mostly body, right?
yeah. So I started with mine. I did meditation for like a year or something. Uh, like getting no benefit out of it. I kept going to this river near my parents' house. I'm like just sitting next to the river and like I'm gonna make my mind focus on the sound of the river, and it would wander away and I'd come back to the river, wander away, come back to the river, get no benefit for a whole year, and then finally after like 3 hours a day of this, my mind actually completely focuses on the river, which is really hard to do because I have all these voices like telling me all this shit, and it's like really hard not to pay attention to the voices and to pay attention to the river instead. But I finally got myself to focus on the river to the point where my conscious mind completely became still, and it allowed it like created a vacuum where my conscious mind is empty, the subconscious fills up that vacuum, so all the like trauma that was in my subconscious came up and basically like came out as like the archetype of like a mutant basically, and it was just like all the reasons that like I thought like nobody would ever love me and nobody would ever respect me, I'm just a piece of shit, I'm totally worthless, I don't deserve friends, I don't deserve love. It just came up as this like mutant, and I identified with that mutant as like this is me, and then it came off like a mask, and I just kind of looked at the mask as like something else, just some story I'd be telling myself, and underneath that was this like human being who was like worthy of love, and I just felt this like ocean of love pour into my heart for myself, and just all this self acceptance and everything, and I cried for like 20 minutes, and that's when it really kind of confirmed my suspicion, like it's not fully just like a chemical imbalance that I had. It really was like something psychological. Um, but after that, it was very hard to meditate because I was always worried a demon was going to like pop out of me again. So I couldn't focus after that. So I wound up getting into yoga, which was much more physical. I went to this like yoga class with my mom. I thought it was like just old ladies rolling around on the floor. But when I get there, it's like the hardest workout I've ever done in my life. And at the end, I'm like sweating buckets, and I felt like the most relaxed I'd felt in probably my whole life. I couldn't believe it. Like I think all the sweat had just cleared toxins out of my body or something like that, and my mind was clear, my heart was calm, my body felt amazing. And so I just got addicted right away. And basically, after a year of yoga, I realized that when I was having psychotic episodes, these voices would come up and tell me all this stuff. But if I just didn't believe they were real, if I just kind of trusted that it really was just a hallucination, and just relaxed and let go and surrendered, that instead of all this negative stuff happening, something positive would happen. I would start having visions actually of Hindu deities like Shiva, Shakti, Vishnu, all this stuff that at the time I wasn't even really like very familiar with that stuff, but I would start having basically these like religious visions, and they would like open up different chakras, basically different energy centers in my body would open up with these like God visions basically, and I would have these like healing experiences in my body. I would feel it like clearing toxins out of my brain and all this weird stuff like that. And I just kind of decided like, oh, what do I need these antipsychotics for? They're actually just blocking me from having basically a religious experience, because I couldn't have that experience without that psychotic state, which is becoming more and more rare because of the pills. So I decided to get off the pills so that I could embrace what I discovered, which was that I was actually really kind of a mystic who had a bunch of psychological issues. But if I could kind of relax around those psychological issues and kind of overcome them, then what I really was a mystic, and I could have religious experiences instead.
Um, so when you started going off the pills, was it just cold turkey? Did you have guidance? Did you have
That's a great
professional help?
question. That's a really good question. I did have professional help this whole time. I'd be like once a month going and checking in with a psychiatrist at an outpatient clinic, and they'd like weigh me and test my blood to make sure the pills weren't killing me and stuff. But yeah, I kind of worked with them. I just kind of told them like, yeah, I feel like I don't have symptoms anymore. Kind of half lied because I did
Yeah,
have symptoms. I more just kind of figured out how to deal with them.
yeah.
But they kind of worked with me out. Okay, let's do 3/4 dose for a month. Let's do half dose for a month, quarter dose, and eventually nothing.
How old were you at this time?
So I was 17 or 16 really when the psychosis started. 17 when I got checked into a hospital and diagnosed, and I was on the pills for 2 years. So I guess till I was like 19, and then I kind of started weaning off them then.
Ah, some of these, like your experience by the river with the demons rising and
Yeah,
you seeing like like the duality, two
yeah.
selves and stuff. I'm a little into like spiritual discussions and groups, and I don't know if you've heard of Bat Gap. It's pretty cool. It's
Oh,
called Buddha at the gas pump, Bat Gap,
okay.
because everyone's a Buddha, right?
Right, right.
So it kind of sounds like an awakening experience, like a spiritual awakening,
Yeah,
and
it really
then
was.
and then more of along those lines of awakening experiences, because you can have a number of them in life. And you had another one like when you were physically sweating in yoga,
Yeah.
and wow. And you talk about surrender, right? You could
Mhm.
surrender it, like if you're hearing like all these voices, a cacophony of voices, you said you surrendered and you allowed the experience to happen. Can you tell us about surrender and what surrender is? Can you talk us through surrender?
Yeah, it's actually kind of hard to do, which is why I think it became possible after a lot of training with meditation and yoga, because what our minds like to do is really control things. We like to, even our own thoughts, we try to control. So if you're psychotic or something, and you got voices in your head, you kind of, without really, even if you don't want to, you kind of wind up like talking back to them, kind of listening to them, kind of taking what they say a little too seriously. You wind up like really engaging. Um, but to surrender would be to let go and be like, I don't like that voice is there. I notice it. I take a deep breath. I just relax. You can actually do this physically, which is why yoga was very helpful, is that it helps you learn to like literally physically release the tension from your body, because that tension is super tied into the tension in your mind. So that like mental desire to control, your fear, your anxiety, your anger, whatever it is, like it comes into your body and makes tension. And so yoga really helps the body to release tension. And at the end of class, usually they call it shavasana, where you just lay down and kind of relax in your pool of sweat or whatever. But that process of like taking a deep breath, noticing my thoughts, noticing my body, letting out an exhale, letting my body relax, the muscles relax, let the thought go, let the emotion go. Even if it doesn't totally go, you're just letting go of the resistance to it. So instead of being like a jar. That's a terrible metaphor, but I don't want you. I'm not sure what you don't want to be like, but what you do want to be like, what you do want to be like is like the sky. This is like a kind of cliche metaphor, but like the sky is just letting the clouds pass through it. It's not trying to stop them and hold them. It's not trying to push them away. It's just the sky's just open. The clouds are coming and going. They're going to stay as long as they want to stay. The sky's not concerned, right? And that's kind of the way I learned to treat my fear and my fearful thoughts and my paranoid thoughts as just like clouds. I was just kind of there, like the sky. They're coming and going. I'm just focusing on relaxing my body, like letting that fear and tension out of my body. And once my body relaxed, usually the mind would relax and it would transform it basically to a good trip. I don't know if you ever done like LSD or mushrooms or anything like that,
Yes.
but yeah, and like if you like get afraid, like you feel it starting to kick in and you like clench up, you're like, oh no, did I take too much? Or like
Yeah.
you start to see things and you're like, you get scared and you're like, oh, maybe I should throw up. How do I get off this trip? Like if you resist the trip, that's when it gets bad. That's when the demons come out and everything,
Oh.
But when you let go and relax, you kind of trust the mushroom or trust whatever it is. And you're like, whatever you have to show me, like I'm open to it. And you let go. That's when it kind of can actually become like a healing experience. And sometimes that experience is hard. You got to kind of go through something hard, but usually it's kind of trying to show you something good on the other side. That's how I felt like psychosis was a lot like. If I could relax into it and kind of trust it, trust my own mind really, then something positive would usually shift out of it.
So you mentioned, it's funny, there's a Buddhist monk, a woman named Pema Chodron, who said,
Yeah,
we are the everlasting sky, everything else is just the weather, right?
yeah.
And so yeah, but I mean, let's just get down to the nitty gritty. Like when someone is experiencing paranoia, which is
Yeah.
like this persistent discomfort and intense fear, it's
Yeah.
really a mortal fear. Like,
Yeah.
like your life is in danger.
Yeah.
Like in A Beautiful Mind with Russell Crowe, he would peer through the blinds in his window, paranoid about like the cars across the street could be containing, the FBI men who are coming to get him or whatever.
Yeah.
Or it could just be some irrational fear that doesn't have any mind activity, but it still feels like, wow, my life is in danger. So, how does one, I mean, so we are the sky, that's great, but when a cloud is shedding fear and saying, hey man, pay attention to me or I'm gonna frickin' like ruin you, I mean that's
it's a tall order, but I'll tell you two things. One, again, so the sky mind thing, that's again kind of a mental thing, which I wouldn't recommend people start with. I think people should start more physical. So if I had just went straight to, this is very scary, but I'm going to surrender and become the sky, like it wouldn't have worked. Like the fearful thoughts would convince me, like, no, you can't let go of control. If you let go of control, all this bad stuff's going to happen and people are going to kill you, and it's like, okay, I better stay in control, like it was too hard. It had too much grip on me, but that's why training's required. Like the Buddhists, speaking of Buddhist metaphors, like they basically tell you, like, don't wait for the storm to come to dig the roots of the tree deeper. Like the tree has to grow its roots before the storm comes to blow it over. So in the same way, you have to train before those big episodes. If you're like I was, like your whole life's an episode. So it's like just all the time. So it's not, you can't really say like, oh, train for this or train for that. So I wouldn't even recommend really any of the Buddhist techniques at all. That's why I found, that's why I was saying when I was learning to meditate, it was like 6 months to a year. I didn't get any benefit out of it whatsoever. I came out of it feeling just as horrible as when I went in. And it was just that one time when I trained my mind to be so focused that I had this crazy, like basically like exorcism, which isn't like a normal meditation experience. That only happens if you do it like a lot. So I was really doing it like 3 hours a day for like a year. But that's why I really think like something like yoga or like a very physical qigong practice. I wouldn't recommend all qigong. Some of it's very kind of light and mystical, and I'd really recommend something more kind of grounded in your body. But just the act of like getting on the floor with yoga and doing those sun salutations where you push into the ground with your hands and stretch your back and move your body through these positions, like your body and mind, they really are a two-way street. So when we're afraid, we have a posture of fear where we hide our internal organs, right? We pull our chest closer to our abdomen to pull our ribs over our internal organs. We clench our muscles and our abdominal muscles, and we feel afraid, right? And so in yoga, you're stretching open against that fear. And so basically there's a couple things happening with fear. There's the physical body response, there's the emotion, and then there's the mind. There's all the stuff your mind's telling you to kind of keep that cycle of fear going, right? And sometimes that stuff, it sounds like it's what other people's minds are telling you. But basically, if you solve the body, it will often just solve the other two on its own. So let's say you're paranoid that, aliens are hunting you, just as a kind of example. You think aliens are hunting you, they're going to shoot you the laser beam at any second, right? Oftentimes when you're in like that psychotic type of paranoid state, nothing anybody can say can convince you out of it, because your underlying fear is so strong. It doesn't matter what thoughts come. Like you can try to think your way out of it all you want, or other people can kind of talk you out of it all they want. It's not going to happen, because the thoughts are just going to keep rationalizing the fear, because that fear energy is so strong, it'll just keep pushing your mind in the direction of thinking of more reasons to be afraid. So you'll keep thinking like, oh yeah, of course aliens exist because there's 7 trillion planets, and I had this experience as a kid where I saw this light in the sky, so that probably means that the aliens are watching me, and then I did this bad thing this one time, so the aliens probably want to kill me, and now I've told people about it, so they really want to kill. Just keep rationalizing, and it feeds that fear, and the fear feeds those thoughts. But if you can eliminate the feeling of fear from your body, the thoughts will just resolve themselves. You'll wake. It's like your mind will just wake up and be like, why the heck did I think that? Like that was silly to think that. And then you'll start rationalizing the other way. You'll start thinking, well, why would aliens be hunting me out of all 7 billion people? Why haven't I heard of anybody else being hunted by aliens? You'll start being receptive to what other people have to say in sort of counter argument to your belief, right? But the first thing that has to happen is you have to convince your body that it's not in mortal danger. And you can do that through physical practices like yoga, like changing your breathing pattern to be slow, long, deep, to the breathing pattern of someone who has no fear in their body. This will convince your body it's not afraid, which will convince your mind there's nothing to be afraid of. But yeah, starting at the mind is usually not a great idea.
Do you know that song by Peter Tosh, the reggae singer? It's called Mystic Man.
I'm not sure I do.
Check it out, Mystic Man by Peter Tosh. I think you would really dig it.
I guess sounds good.
So you called yourself a mystic man, and you certainly have had a lot of mystical experiences and also some hellish experiences, and awakening type experiences. And just when you engage with your body and all these practices, you experience your own personal energy too. I know, I'm sure of it. So, wow. Like, what does it mean? Like, what should a mystic man, someone who discovers they're a mystic man in life, what should they do with that life? What is best?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a double-edged sword. So let's just call it more like psychically sensitive, like you're able to kind of touch realities that most people aren't able to touch. Most people kind of live in the world of Newtonian physics, right? Everybody in the spiritual world wants to say like, oh, when you're spiritual, you get into quantum physics. I think quantum physics is on the other direction. It goes like quantum, Newtonian, and then there's like spiritual physics. So it's kind of like you're kind of somewhere in that, able to touch that other realm of physics. But it means, I think, that you also like, yes, you might get some like interesting ability to have visions. Maybe you have extra creativity. You can paint beautiful artwork that nobody could have imagined before, or make beautiful music nobody could have imagined before. You can, maybe you're some kind of empathic. You can kind of feel what other people are feeling, and that gives you a good skill as a healer or something like that, or a therapist. Like, those things are great, but if you get too lost in them, like if you over focus on them, sometimes they'll kind of take you too far, and you'll kind of lose touch with reality. I find this a lot in like kind of new agey spiritual world. Everybody's so excited to have supernatural abilities or something like that, that they totally forget to have like a little bit of skepticism in their mind. Like, did I just feel what that person was feeling, or did I feel what my mind assumed that person was feeling? Like, did I kind of logically deduce they might be feeling this and then kind of have a feeling to reflect that? Or did I genuinely like have some kind of energetic exchange with them where I felt their energy, right? And it's like a lot of times that questioning gets thrown out the window. And I think that's kind of unhealthy. Like, it's also unhealthy that like mainstream society just thinks like, oh, we've already discovered everything that could be possible. There's nothing new to discover in terms of possibilities. So if you think you had a psychic experience on LSD, you're just a crazy person. We don't want to hear about it. Here's your pills. I think that's kind of stupid too. But you do need a healthy degree of skepticism, even towards your own sort of, mystical abilities or whatever. And also you need to recognize that like you're a person that's going to need possibly kind of stronger boundaries in your life, because you have less sort of energetic boundaries. You're a little more like mentally flexible, sensitive. You're going to need to kind of create a life that doesn't necessarily look like everybody else's life. You might not be able to go clubbing with your friends and drink every weekend. You might not be able to smoke weed every day to relax. You might not be able to eat McDonald's every day. Like, your body might be more sensitive too. You might need to actually think about what nutrients are going in your body to support your brain and your nervous system. You might need to stay out of certain social situations where people are more aggressive and more mentally unhealthy, and you need some time. You might need to cultivate a community of people that are trying to improve themselves spiritually. You might need a religious framework. You might need to actually think about, praying more often, devoting yourself to some higher being idea or something, because you don't want your, abilities to become your God. You don't, like, this is something all of the great traditions warned against. Christianity went a little far, kind of burning people who had seemingly supernatural abilities. But even the ancient yogis and the Taoists and the Buddhists warned against getting too obsessed with supernatural abilities, because that was a distraction from the ultimate goal of like oneness with God or enlightenment or whatever. That this oneness would often give you kind of supernatural abilities, but the supernatural abilities would lead you far, far, far astray from that oneness if you didn't make the oneness your sort of prime directive. So I think sometimes people need that focus in their life of something as like the ultimate pinnacle, whether it's the Tao or enlightenment, nirvana, God, a deity or something like that, but something to surrender yourself to and give yourself to as the highest sort of source of meaning, I suppose.
What I'm gathering from all that you said just now is that it's important for us human beings to maintain our inner peace, and that can take a lot of work. And sometimes it means changing lifestyle. Often it can mean changing lifestyle and changing like who we interact with, who we let into our lives. I've heard talk, a lot of spiritual leaders say you should surround yourself with people who are contribute positively to your psyche and your well-being, and all that stuff. And there was a spiritual leader from India, Ramana Maharshi. I don't know if you're familiar with him. His disciples would ask Ramana, like, how do I know I'm advancing spiritually? And Ramana Maharshi would say, when there's little to no thoughts in your mind, when your mind is practically empty, that's when you know that. And you mentioned yourself, like when we're in the grips of fear, the fear rises to the mind, and the mind tries to rationalize, and it actually just winds up pouring more fuel on the fire, and making the experience of psychosis and paranoia just much more all-encompassing. And I experienced that recently when I had a fight with my partner recently. It was terrible, and my mind was just trying to like make it even worse.
It'll just spin out even more.
Yeah. So tell me, what role do you have love in your life, and what role love plays?
I mean, definitely when I was in the worst of psychosis, my mom was my biggest supporter, and she was a social worker. Or, I don't know if she was a social, well, I guess she was. She had a degree in social work. She worked with old people mostly, but she kind of knew a lot of the protocols and stuff, and was very supportive. And when I showed an interest in kind of Eastern medicine, spirituality stuff, she was very supportive in that and helped me a lot with that. And so it was I definitely had some friends and like a girlfriend at one point and everything. Like I had a lot of support in a lot of ways, and that was pretty indispensable. But it really got helpful when I moved when I was like 23 from Toronto, Canada to Santa Cruz, California, where I was like, there was a Qigong teacher there that I wanted to study with, and I went there. I just thought I was going to take his classes or something and work as a waiter, but I wound up getting a job with him and kind of became like his assistant, and did kind of like a 3-year apprenticeship with them, which was
he saw
really
something
cool.
in you, right?
I think that was part of it. Yeah.
What do you think he saw?
Well, mostly I think Qigong attracts only women over 60 years old. So when a young guy came along, he was so excited to have a young guy to mentor. I think he was just jumping all over it. And as I said before, I had kind of a weird relationship with my dad growing up. So I had this kind of dad hole in my heart. So this, 50-something-year-old guy kind of stepping in as like a mentor figure was like so healing for me, really. And really, I felt like filled in a lot of like psychological gaps for me. But then the whole community that I found, like the other people attending Qigong and taking the trainings and working for him and everything, I really found like this amazing community there, and all my best friends.
Let me ask you about this teacher. He became like a father figure.
Yeah.
Did you spend a lot of time with him, and did he instruct you outside of the class and in the ways of the universe, in the ways of mysticism and Eastern philosophy? And did he really like take you under his wing, like I hate to say it's a dirty word, but like a guru?
It was a lot like that. Yeah, he kind of gave me a lot of time, a lot of private time and stuff, and most of the stuff I need to learn technique wise was already in the classes and workshops. But the thing I really learned from spending time with him outside of class was just how to be a human being, like how he interacted with his kids, his wife, his his well, even his students, but his friends, his family. I really got to just kind of shadow him and just I spent a lot. I'd go over to his house a lot. We'd go surfing and stuff, and it was a lot of fun. And but I get to meet his family and everything, and it really was interesting how like this wasn't one of those gurus who like pretends all spiritual in front of everybody and then goes home and like yells at their wife or something. Like he really was like the real deal behind the scenes. And like one of the big promises of qigong is like you're gonna have less stress and a lot more energy. And I just constantly saw that with him. Like he had 3 kids, all of them under like 6 years old or something when I met him. 2 of them were twins. They had a ton of energy. They're climbing all over him all day. And he just has all this energy to deal with those kids and his family. And he was a very famous teacher. So he's constantly got all these people pulling at him. Everybody wants a little piece of him and everything. And he just always had patience, always had energy, always had just love in his heart for everybody. And it was just amazing to just kind of absorb that from him. So that was really cool.
Did he ever tell you what the his secret was?
Lots of qigong, it seemed like.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's explore love a little bit more. Do you love yourself?
I'd say so.
What does that mean exactly?
Well, one of the things I learned about love was a lot of it was just to have a thicker skin, I think. I think I was so dependent on other people loving me, thinking good things about me, having respect for me, that I kind of didn't even think about what that meant coming from myself. So, another weird story. One day I was camping. I was like 22, and I was trying to kind of make a like meditation retreat out of it. This was in Canada, and I'm at this park that has a lot of black bears, and so every day I'm like meditating, doing yoga all day, and then every night this black bear walks right past my tent, like a foot from my head, and walks into the campground and like steals people's food out of their cars, like breaks their windows and stuff, and then walks right back past my, or runs back past my head because everybody's getting up and it's scared. Runs past my head back into the woods, and every night it did this for like 2 weeks. And so every night I'm kind of scared going to bed. I'm like, man, is this bear gonna walk past my head again? And I was always kind of worried I like left a granola bar in my pocket or something like that, and it was gonna come to my tent and like eat me. But one day, so again, so this is kind of what the training thing means, right? Like meditation really is like kind of going to the gym, building a muscle, getting stronger over time. It's just a mind muscle. And so I'm getting stronger and stronger with my focus. And one day, it's like the middle of the night. I'm walking back from the beach where I'd been kind of meditating under the moon or whatever. And doing a walking meditation to get back to my campsite, which is just where you kind of walk slowly, breathe slowly. And instead of just being aware of like your breath, you're aware of like your footsteps, right? And that's what you're focusing on. And as I'm doing that, I'm kind of falling into a trance, and I pass the campsite that the night before the bear had like stolen their food or whatever. And I see the thoughts of the bear go through my mind. It's like these fearful thoughts like, oh no, like, should I sleep with a knife under my pillow again? Like, is this bear going to eat me? But I'm in this kind of trance state, so I can kind of just let that thought go, observe it, like the cloud in the sky. And then I kind of, as that thought passes out of my mind, this new thought comes up, which is just empathy for the bear. It's like, oh, this poor bear is just like hungry. It's there's been a drought this year. There's no berries in the woods for it to eat. So it's like it's totally scared of us, probably more scared of us than we are of it. and it's just coming in here because it's literally starving. And then I felt so sad for the bear, but that empathy in my heart combined with this extremely like focused state combined to basically bring the bear's chi, like its energy, into my heart, and it went down into my stomach and made this like extremely strong feeling of being like centered and strong in myself. Like I was as strong as a bear. And then it basically was like golden light. It was very weird. And it spread through my body. And I had this vision of myself become a bear. Like I grew a big black snout and claws and black fur all over my body. And around that black fur, like this golden aura, like came out of my core and from my stomach or something. And I just kept doing this walking meditation. I'm like walking like a bear, and just all these like mental qualities that the bear had that I wanted like came through me. So bears are kind of independent. They're not really social creatures. They kind of like will tolerate you, but they're not really like interested in whether you like them or anything like that. So they're very like thick-skinned creature. And I kind of like absorbed that quality from it. Like suddenly I couldn't care less what anybody thought of me. I have this thick skin. I was able to kind of slow down, relax, like all of these qualities that don't really come naturally to me. I'm kind of a wiry, kind of anxious person. I fully like got into this, like if you ever seen the Jungle Book, like the bear in the Jungle Book is like just the bare necessity, like it's all relaxed, go with the flow. Like I totally took on that vibe, like and just this like extremely strong feeling of like all of my self-respect, self-esteem, all of that is like coming from inside, and it's so strong inside me that it's filling up a field around me of like literal thick skin. Like the energy around my skin was thicker, and it's like it repelled other people's opinions or something. Like I felt that in my body. It was very weird. But I kind of walked with that for like 10 minutes and just like felt like better than I'd felt in years. And I sort of came out of that like, oh, like self-love was one thing. I kind of learned from that meditation where the demon came out of me or whatever, and then I had all this self-love. But another thing was self-respect. Like I really needed to stop caring what other people thought so much and feel inner strength. Like I was strong enough that I would be okay on my own, even if nobody liked me. And I kind of started nurturing that ability from there. And another weird experience where a bear like almost stepped on me and ate me a few months later, and because it didn't see me or something, so it literally almost stepped on my foot while I was laying down in the woods. And, and it ran away because once it saw me like freak out, it freaked out and ran away. But I kind of thought like, oh, this is like a message from the universe. Like there's something in this like bear energy that I need. And so I really kind of started pushing into that. Like, how can I be more thick-skinned? How can I not give a shit what anybody thinks of me? How can I be more independent and enjoy my solitude and not need a group of friends or other people so much? And the more I pushed into that, the more it just became almost a natural part of me. Where nowadays it's almost like half of my personality. So it's kind of cool that your personalities are that malleable.
So we're going to close soon, and I just wanted to ask you and be, give me like, your usual level-headed response to this question, which is, is going off serious psych meds I mean, is it can anyone do it, and is it recommended? How much has luck played in your life to have allowed you and to come through this relative, not just I can't say unscathed, but evolved. This evolution sounds like it could be very dangerous for somebody else.
I think so.
What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, I think luck did play a big role, because I don't see a lot of people doing what I'm doing. I would say almost anybody can come off the psych meds, but not necessarily right now. I think for me, it took me 2 years of exploring different methods of managing my own mental health before I felt like comfortable enough that going off the pills would be possible. Some people might need more than 2 years. Some people might need a lot more than just meditation and yoga. But that was the only tools I had at that time. But I also did it with professional help. They're kind of monitoring me. Cold turkey, I think, is definitely the wrong way to go for anybody. And some psych meds are extremely difficult to get off, like anti-anxiety meds can create incredible withdrawal symptoms. People can wind up basically like hospitalized for how intense the anxiety, benzodiazepine and everything withdrawals can be. So sometimes even with professional help, benzo withdrawal, there's not even really a protocol for it in mainstream medicine. It's kind of just like, oh, like hopefully it goes away, you know. Like,
Yeah.
so it's something I take extremely seriously, because I know for myself, like I can't rewind time and see what would have happened if I'd gone off those pills a year earlier, but I don't think it would have worked out as great. So I think I did need them as sort of a crutch until I could get some tools under my belt that worked for me. So definitely everybody should be extremely careful with that.
Are there any parting words for our community that you have to say, that you'd like to say, you'd like to share with us before we end?
Yeah. Well, I mean, if anybody is interested in kind of learning like what I recommend people try, probably the best resources, I have like a short little e-course, it's like $20 or something on my website, called like 7-Day Brain Reset. And it's just giving you like, it's like a simple diet to try and some simple kind of mind body exercises to try. And the idea is just to try them for like a week and see if you just feel like a little bit better. And if you feel a little bit better, then that's at least kind of a hint in the right direction. Like, oh, here's some tools that might be helpful. Maybe I'll start moving a little more in this direction. So it's just something to try. It's pretty easy, and pretty cheap. And yeah, if people want to figure out what I think works, that's where to do it.
Thank you, Nick Loffree, for sharing your story with us.
Yeah.
I'm sure someone is going to really appreciate it. I know I did.
Oh, good.